What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and today we're going off to an island, a desert island, and we're going to be doing some desert island comics. And I've got a great friend on. I've got Dave on from, well, multiple podcasts, I should say. You may remember him. We did our Star Wars adventure recently. Dave, how you doing?
Not too bad. Cheers, Scott, for having me on. I can't wait to discuss a bit of Desert Island comics with you.
Yeah, thanks for nice. It's something I've been wanting to try and do for a while now. Just a little topic I thought I could throw in, sort of, you know, maybe not so long podcast, like short and sharp, and just have a look at comics that people enjoy and sort of somewhat, you know, especially if it goes back to that area that I really like, that sort of the 20th century. But we will jump right in because you've picked some three crackers, I should say. I've enjoyed sort of getting into these a bit this week. What were the choices? What were your choices for this week?
Well, I guess the first thing is, you know, it is such a difficult thing. I'm sure,
Yes.
You know, when you actually boil it down, you think, oh yeah, there's loads of comics that I've read over the years that I absolutely love, and then someone asks you to narrow it down to three, and it's like, and single issues as well, so not kind of trades or story arcs or whatever, and it's like, oh god, that is a hard task. So it did have me questioning, and I guess I've ended up going back and looking a little bit nostalgically at some of the things that I've read kind of earlier on in my youth, and then one of them is something that is from that kind of 80s era, but I only read it years later. But I have to say, you know, it did get me thinking back to, you know, and exercising bits of my brain that I haven't been exercised in a long time. And I was thinking back to, okay, where was my first exposure to comics? What actually got me into them in the first place? And I think that when I was very young, so, you know, you're probably, I don't know, younger than 8, say, I seem to remember getting like a few Hulk comics and also Spider-Man comics bought for me, and then just looking at the pictures and not really having a clue what's going on, but you know, you kind of went through them and identified with the characters, but I couldn't really pull anything out of that era. I think there is one Hulk issue, I seem to remember it had the Absorbing Man on the front of it, and he was giving the Hulk a bit of an ass whooping. I can't remember which issue of the Hulk that was, but that one sticks out in my mind's eye. And also Rocket Raccoon's first appearance in the Hulk, also seem to remember having that issue. But after that initial stage, and you know, when you think kids should be into comics, and of course read the Beano, the Dandy, all those kind of comic strip things that you used to get in the UK, it was actually what I think of it in my mind as Giant Size X-Men #1. And for years, I thought that's what it was. It was Giant Size X-Men #1. Whereas actually what it was Classic X-Men #1, which was a reprint. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit. I'm saying Giant Size X-Men #1, but it was 1986 when they released that first issue, which was the reprint. And I remember going up to the newsagents. I remember looking around, and remember when newsagents actually had comics, you know, before the days of comic shops and everything.
Yeah.
And I looked down, and I just see this cover that I found out many years later that was by Art Adams. You've got Wolverine on the front, you've got Cyclops there, you've got big hulking Colossus, all these characters just bursting out of the cover. And, you know, I never had much money to buy lots of comics, so it only had to be one, and that was the one that I selected.
It's one of those ones. I think, you know, it's like a milestone, especially in the X-Men and Marvel. It's you know, like you say, Giant Size X-Men #1. It's just one of those issues that you sort of that gets referred to a lot, doesn't it? So it's a definite milestone issue for Marvel.
Yeah, and just by pure chance, and through my adult life, I've ended up, I kind of always go back to Marvel. I like to dip my toe into a bit of DC, and I like, when someone gives me a good recommendation for a good indie run, like everyone's read Saga, haven't they? And, Chew and things
Yeah.
like that. So, but I always go back to Marvel, and I think it's just that chance encounter to wander into the newsagents, because when I was trying to collect comics, I mean, back in those days, Marvel UK was quite a thing, and I'd quite often, like I say, I probably bought like one comic a week maximum, but I'd quite often buy stuff like Transformers. They actually had a Spider-Man and Zoids. Remember Zoids?
Yes, yeah.
So I actually
Grant
bought.
Morrison wrote for that.
I know, it's crazy. I do want to go back and try and find some of those issues, but I don't think you can get them digital anywhere. So I'm going to have to search eBay and try and find them. But yeah, so I'd quite often buy those things, but just this particular cover just sold me on it. And it just happened to be one of the, like you say, a milestone uh, uh, issue in the whole of comics, really.
It is. It's one of those things, isn't it? Especially like you say, if you come across something in your formative years, it sticks with you. Like you say, you go back to Marvel because that's that sort of that was the comics that sort of when you were a kid, it sort of took you to those characters. You referenced like the Hulk when you were so little, and just look. You don't have to read it, but like looking through the pictures, it sort of sticks with you and sets you on a path. Really, doesn't it? Like you say, you'll go off and read other things, but there always seems to be a character or a sort of a magazine or something that you just keep coming back to. It's interesting how those early years can be affected in that way.
Yeah, and like I say, it was completely by luck. And obviously, you do a bit more research when you get older. And it was interesting how, Len Wein came up with this idea. You had the first X-Men team, which was like 4 white guys and all good American boys and one girl. And she's she's very much written like a 60s woman, isn't she? She's not too strong or what have you. And Len Wein wrote this giant size X-Men #1, but for me it was when Chris Claremont took over the reins, and he was chomping at the bit, I believe, to take the reins on this one. And for me, that just catapulted X-Men into the stratosphere. And then so by the time the early 90s came, it just blew my mind, having gone through this journey from 1986 and then actually seeing them on the screen with that Fox Kids cartoon. It was just like, oh, this is so good. It felt like good times.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the really interesting thing. You're so right that everyone talks about the original X-Men and says, oh, they were a metaphor for the sort of whether it be minorities or whatever, or the sort of the race issues and sort of thing. And you sort of go, I sort of see what you're saying, but they're all very white and very not too weird, and then you get this issue. Which really re-baselines. I mean, this is where modern X-Men has come from, isn't it? This sort of re-baselines it, and you get like Nightcrawler and Colossus and Storm and Banshee and all these characters, and you're just like, oh yeah, this is the X-Men that I know and love. Like this is where they came from, and they feel like outsiders now. Like they've really sort of gone for it, which I think is fascinating. It's a real sort of boundary pushing kind of step, isn't it? Like it feels quite brave, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they literally started off with that idea. I can't remember the chap's name. It wasn't Len Wein, but it was more of a sort of higher management exec type person. It wasn't Stan Lee, but someone came up with the idea, let's just have an international team, because X-Men, although it had been created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, it wasn't great, to be honest. And that whole thing about it being a metaphor and Magneto's Malcolm X and Professor X's Martin Luther King, that all kind of came after, in the first issues. I mean, that very first issue of X-Men, Magneto is just your classic mustache twirling
Yeah.
stereotypical villain. There's no layers to him at all, and so it only comes a little bit later. In those early X-Men issues, they're kind of celebrated just like any other superheroes are. They go and smash up a building to, apprehend the
Yeah.
bad guys, and it's like, yay, the X-Men. And it's only kind of, it evolved a bit after that, but they ended up having to cancel it. And then obviously it's way before the days of digital and being able to download copies and what have you. So, they'd reprint, they'd carry on the numbering, but they were all just old reprints. And so, they came up with this idea, let's just have a fully international team, and to be honest, to have like a Russian in there, for a start at the height of the Cold War kind of thing, it was quite a brave move. But no, you're right. I mean, this is your real X-Men for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's interesting. Like you say, it's brave, and we'll get into the sort of like the writing, and because obviously originally this came out in like 75, I think.
Yep.
And you can tell that there's still a little bit of that old school thinking around some of the characters, I mean. I really enjoyed this issue, and I sort of like whipped through it quite quickly, and went back and was reading bits and pieces of it. But there were times when I was a bit like, when you get like Colossus, how'd you say his name? Peter, just because he was like Peter.
I just say Peter, to be honest.
Yeah, but, he's just so. It's just so. I don't know, like he's between naive or what, but he's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to leave and go join these people. And it's like, you've been raised on a farm. This is really. It shouldn't be this simple to just get people to join the X-Men. It seems really bizarre.
But I think as well, doesn't he say that his power, because he's got this power, shouldn't that be owned by the state?
Yeah.
A little nod there to communism, obviously. But I tell you what, it does remind me of as well. It's Superman 3. You think? Do you remember the bit that I mean when you have the little boy?
I think so. Yes,
the little boy in Smallville, and you get the old combine harvester, and it's
in the field. Yeah, Lana Langton, isn't it? Yeah,
that's the one. Yeah. So I mean, it's just straight out of here, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And yeah, because this is it. I mean, it opens with Nightcrawler, and I like the way they play this because I mean, to give the plot. Because I assume this was a continuation. I mean, the plot's really simple. It's simply like the X-Men have disappeared on some island, and Professor X is basically collecting a bunch of new mutants to go and save them. But like, it's not messing around. Like this issue does not, it lays on new ideas relatively, but it doesn't mess around. Like you start with Nightcrawler, and he's straight away sort of like you're just learning about who he is. It's sort of like, oh yeah, well. I look like the elf, or I look like a monster, but they are the true monsters. And then you sort of, obviously, again, like, he evolves to become more thoughtful and, I wouldn't say passive, but not really a pacifist. But in this, he's like, yeah, so I'm going to throw myself literally into the battle and just start kicking ass. And that's within pages. I was just like, I was quite surprised at sort of a 70s comic that's this sort of gung ho and quite sort of fast paced.
Yeah, I think it definitely is, and it isn't really a continuation. Like I say, they'd cancelled the X-Men because it wasn't selling very well, and I think also Stan Lee has been quoted since as just saying, "Look, it's easier if you're writing about Spider-Man just to carry on writing about Spider-Man. You got that one character and his supporting cast." But if you've got all of these different superheroes interacting, they've all got their different personalities, it's just harder work, to think what's everyone's motivations and everything. So all these things led to the book being cancelled. And like you say, this is a great kind of standalone story. It feels like you're jumping in halfway through, but you can literally pick it up on page one. And it was fun for me because I went back, obviously, and just flick through it, and again, it just brings back so many memories. Again, back in the 80s, you weren't collecting comics or anything. There was no keeping them pristine. You just read them to death, and they jammed so much back then into one comic book. It was so dense, and it, when Claremont comes along, it gets even more dense
I
with
was going
a
to
lot
say,
more
yeah,
words.
yeah,
But
that's a different era.
yeah,
Yeah, I totally love that because I was amazed at sort of I bought this on Comixology and it's about like what it says on here. It says it's like 37 pages, and yeah, that's quite a long comic. I mean, it's a giant size issue, but they pack an entire story in this. If this was going to be, in fact, I tell you what, if this was a story today, and especially if Brian Bendis was to write this is like 7 or 8 issues.
yeah, easily.
Yeah.
And that's what, again, coming back to as we are going to our desert island, you kind of need a dense story that you can keep going back to. And,
Yeah.
you look at the artwork's fantastic. And there's a lot of meaning to every single panel. There is no panel that's wasted. Whereas in your more modern comics, I like them because you can breeze through them quite quickly.
Mhm.
And the artwork and the printing process and everything is so much better, obviously, now. But for that, compressed type of storytelling, I just think it's fantastic.
It really is. I mean, like I say, you say about the artwork, and it's uh, what who was it? Let me have a quick check. It was Dave Cockrum,
Yep.
and it's superb. I mean, like you say, every panel is has something to say. Like there is nothing wasted, and like I say, it's not one of those books where you get okay, well, this page, I've got 6 panels, and actually it's a character and it's a coloured background. Like, no, there is something going on like all over the place. And the one that stands out for me really is him going to see Storm. And I'd forgotten that this was sort of like the original comic book origin. Obviously, again, like all these characters have evolved, but to
Hmm.
have her as a topless weather witch in sort of in Africa and stuff,
Yeah.
but and using her hair to cover her sort of modesty, but like, all the bits with the rain and the wind whipping around and everything else, like it's a really good looking book. Like the art in this is fantastic.
It is, and like I say, I think I can't help but look at the Art Adams cover on the classic X-Men #1 and
Mm.
compare it to the giant size, and I think, to be honest, for my preference, I think Art Adams just edges it. But no, it all looks great, and I think if you look back at, like, say, Hulk 181, when Wolverine first popped up, he looked a bit different, didn't he? So he didn't actually debut in this giant size. They just used him as a character here, but for me, he just looks a bit better. If you go back, his sort of helmet type thing, his horns type thing are a bit smaller in Hulk, and he just starts to look like a good character here. But I mean, some of the motivation doesn't stand up that well. They've invested huge amounts of money, the Canadian government, into this into this
Yeah.
Weapon X, and he's just like, no, I'm off.
Yeah. I love that scene because they actually say that. Don't they? He's like, we've
Yeah,
invested loads in you. And he's like, tough, and
yeah.
leaves. And I'm just like, that's what, it's the same with the sort of like the Native American character,
Thunderbirds, yeah.
Thunderbird. He weirdly, like he. I'm not sure if he's well written or not. I don't think he is because it's the dialogue in this bit becomes a little bit too Tonto-ish at times. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of like
Yeah, yeah.
referring to his pale face and white eyes and other stuff. I'm like, oh, it doesn't rest. It doesn't sit well. But however, his frustrations and his bitterness comes from a real place. This thing of his race having been forced onto reservations and being to, basically wasting away was a legit concern in the 70s and stuff. So
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
bringing these real fears out and real issues out. It's just sometimes I think they're obviously getting put through a filter to make it more palatable or a bit more sort of like you say, comic booky.
Yeah, I think again, one of the things, and I'm sure all the companies do it to one degree or another, but especially when I go back to like the 60s, Marvel came out around 63, wasn't it, when they started trading as Marvel.
Mm.
They just seem to have pushed that kind of social boundary a little bit further. You know, they tackled hard issues that not necessarily head on, and you know they kind of try to walk that middle line a bit. They wouldn't just say this is absolutely wrong. You know, they wouldn't take a stance like that, but it would kind of hint at little issues like this, like you say. And I guess I never thought that Thunderbird was. I'm going to have to go back now. You've got me thinking. I never really thought about his kind of stilted dialogue, but for me, it just felt like he wasn't in it enough. I just thought he looked great, and in the issues after this, I'm afraid, you know, spoilers, but he doesn't last too long,
Yeah.
because I think they thought that, you know, he was a bit too close to Wolverine, you know, in personality and everything, and you know he's the muscle of the group. But you know, years later, his brother pops up, Warpath.
Mm. Yeah, and that's it. This book is loaded with those sorts of characters, and some of them are like I say, really good. It's interesting to see. Because again, like I say, it's the designs. They look great. I mean, the other thing I like about this, which is a very 70s thing, I think it's sort of 6 is chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure why, but I really enjoy that in comics. So you get like, you know, chapter 1 is the sort of like the band being brought together, and then like chapter 2, which probably would have been like issue 3 or 4 by, you know, modern standards.
Yeah,
They're all together in their outfits and sort of ready to go. And I love the fact that, I mean, because these are all the designs, and you know, I'd say, you know, looking at the picture, most of these designs have pretty much survived. I think like Storm has been adapted to be less risque, I think, in sort of modern times. But like Nightcrawler hasn't changed at all, really, has he? You know,
no.
Colossus has barely changed. Even like Wolverine, like the outfit they give Wolverine here survives like well into the early 2000s. I mean, I know you get the brown outfit later, but like, you know, like you said, the X-Men, that Fox Kids X-Men cartoon, that is this Wolverine and this Colossus and this Nightcrawler. So, you know,
Yeah,
it sets the template really. Although
and
I would say if I was Colossus and I was given that outfit, I mean, granted he's ripped, you know, but even I'd be like, it's a bit drafty, this one.
this is several years before Operation U-Tree, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
let's face it, right? With the metal, you know, when he turns into metal, I think the outfit looks pretty cool, but it's because
yeah,
of his metal skin.
yeah.
When he's not got the metal skin, it looks ridiculous.
It really, yeah,
But the other
yeah,
one I'd almost forgot, and I go back and I have no idea why he's in it, but Sunfire. They just bring in this Japanese character who's a bit of a dick.
yeah.
You know? And he's just like, he doesn't want to be there, but he flies all the way to the US to just tell him that, you know, he doesn't want to be there. And I'm not quite sure whether it was just to, you know, maybe they really were trying to cover all the bases, you know, and make sure they had a Japanese superhero in there. But I mean, he just seemed a bit unnecessary to the story to me.
Well, I was convinced. I mean, reading through it, and again, it's one of those where you sort of, I think you provide like a modern sensibility. But I was like, him going off and then coming back, I was like, oh, he's going to have to be integral to the resolution of this story. Like, you know,
Exactly.
we're going to have this moment where, thank goodness he came back, and then yeah, he doesn't do anything. And you're a bit like, oh, all right, well, yeah, like he could have stayed at home and there would have been no problems whatsoever. I mean, there's a couple of the thing I would say is, you know, like, okay, I enjoy all of this, but there's a couple of things in the end that feel a little bit, I must say, pointless. But from a story point of view, it's almost like, okay, we've got to fill some pages, like, okay, to keep them dense. But when they get to the island to save the old X-Men, they find out that there's a huge, like a giant mutant there that seems to have developed from the island. And at one point, Professor X takes it on in like a mental battle, and then that does nothing. Like
Yeah.
it literally lasts about half a page, and then never pays off in any way, shape, or form. Really, it's like, oh, all right, well, that was an intense 2 panels.
Yeah, I mean, again, though, like you say, that would probably be a whole issue now. So I guess
Yeah,
what they're trying to tell us is that, you know, I mean, Professor X is supposed to be one of the most powerful mutants, but he's just got no chance against this island
mm.
of Krakoa. So, you know, I guess it does seem a little bit like a blind alley, and I guess I was going back and I was thinking, you know what, as a kid, I had no idea what these last few pages were about. They end up jettisoning the island. They use the
Into space.
magnetic, yeah,
Yeah.
the magnetic pull and
Mm.
whatever to kind of catapult them into space, and that's how they do it. So, and I believe again, Chris Claremont, when he was in the office, actually helped out with figure out how they would beat this island. But yeah, I think that probably does go on a little bit too long. That just that end fight scene.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it has that typical moment of we've tried to take this on ourselves, individually. Now we can work as a team, and so you get like Cyclops and Havoc and sort of Storm and Banshee working together to to take on the island. I think it's quite good. It's a good fun, but like I say, it does go on a little bit.
Yeah.
Question I've got actually, because obviously having read this, I was curious to sort of like I've got an image and my take on Iceman has obviously come from much later issues and stuff, but he comes across as a bit of a dick in this, and I'm not sure if I just don't know if I was like, am I maybe putting something into this, but he just comes across like you say, just sort of cocky and a bit knobbish, and I was just like, oh, that doesn't seem like the Iceman I'm used to. So it was just interesting to see that these are older versions of the characters, really.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby, he was like the youngest of the group in those early X-Men issues. And,
Mm.
he'll always be the youngest one in the group, if you know what I mean, for that original team. Obviously, he's one of the first, or not, probably not one of the first, but in continuity, he's gay now, isn't he?
Mm.
So, but I remember Iceman for actually my first exposure was probably Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends. When you had
Yeah,
Iceman and you had Firestar.
yeah. They cover all the elements.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
So no, I think Bobby is a little bit cocky, but again,
yeah,
I forgive him because I love him.
yeah.
Now, interestingly, I mean, again, I can kind of on my desert island, I can think about other stories. I mean, this story was retconned years later. So I don't know if you're aware, but Ed Brubaker took this story and sort of wrote an arc called Deadly Genesis, where he basically said
Mm.
that this is the second team that Professor X put together to go and rescue the original X-Men. So he actually formed another team, but they sort of got decimated. And there was another Summers brother, guy called Vulcan, terrible character to be honest, but I thought it was quite interesting. And in the last, I would say, 10 years, I think Professor X has been handled very differently. He was this kind of headmaster type figure, and then he became a bit more lovable, a bit more cuddly. Patrick Stewart, kind of fatherly
Mm.
Professor X, but no, they were kind of, in more recent comics, they've been sort of questioning how virtuous a lot of his morals were.
Yeah, I've seen that, but it's an interesting arc they've taken him on because he's no longer. And well, they seem to have done it with quite a lot with the X Men. I think there's so many of them they do these things. But yeah, this idea that actually, he isn't like you say the virtuous and the good guy that he's actually been portrayed for years. Like he's actually quite selfish and actually quite dangerous. Now I think it's an interesting take, to go on because I mean they've obviously done the same with Scott Summers. Cyclops seems to have switched from hero to villain a couple of times, at least once that I'm aware of. So it's
Yeah, and Magneto quite often finds himself on the other side, which kind of
mm,
leads us to another one of my choices.
yeah. That's what a segue.
It wasn't
um,
actually planned that way. I was going to talk about this one third, but actually that was seamless, that wasn't it?
yeah, it was absolutely. So we're going to stick with Marvel, and we're going to jump forward a couple of years really to this. But what's your second choice then?
So again, this comes back to this same newsagents at the top of our road. I'm pretty sure it was a John Menzies, and again on a different occasion, wandering up there and just seeing what they had there. And I think I mentioned before, when I actually was trying to keep track of a story, they never bloody got the right issues in it. So it was always a bit
Mm.
random what issues you'd actually find there. But stumbled across Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars #1.
This was an interesting issue. I mean, again, like, you talk about the cover. You know, this is an all out cover, isn't it, for this #1?
Yeah.
And you know,
Sorry, go on.
it's very similar in that sense of, like, you know, it's presenting as many heroes, and some of the same heroes, but as presenting as many heroes as possible. In a sort of like, this is a sort of a comic where you go, oh my god, this is going to be awesome. It's a really good cover.
It is a great, great cover. I do think so. Giant Size X-Men #1 absolutely stands up. You know, the writing from Len Wein, it is all compressed, but I think it stands up quite well. Again, you can't think too deeply about some of the motivations. Whereas Secret Wars, I mean, this one was written by Jim Shooter, and it was blatantly just created to sell toys, as you know, a lot of comics and cartoons and stuff were at the time. I think the cover is fantastic, but I do have to say, this one, I can't imagine this will be in many people's Desert Island choices. It is just purely for the nostalgia for me. But when I'm going back and I'm reading through it, it's like, oh my god, some of this writing's pretty terrible, to be fair.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's funny how we sort of said about that. You know, Giant Size X-Men #1 is it's you know, we said about every panel is sort of really important, and the story is really dense, and they've tried to do a lot with these things. Yeah, this one is a very different story. It is good fun. I mean, this is another one where they are not messing around. There's no sort of preamble. It literally starts with the you know, selection of Marvel heroes, you know, in space on some sort of space station, and it's just like, and we're off, and that's it. It sort of goes from there. So it doesn't mess around at all.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so it was Mattel that came out with the line. Again, when I'm reading it as an adult, it's the dialogue. So the concept is fine. You know, again, the fact that the motivation is to sell toys. It was the first real event comic that I can remember, you know, and so I think this was this was a bit earlier, so this was 84-ish, 85-ish time, wasn't it, when the whole run came out? But I'm specifically thinking of this first issue, and I think at the time as a kid, you know, I'm reading it, and it's okay, it's at my level, you know. When I'm reading it now, it's like, you know, here are all the heroes. Let's do a quick roll call. I'm Iceman, you know, I'm Spider-Man, I'm Wolverine, you know. It all kind of flows like that.
That bit really weirded me out, because this is sort of like, well, Wasp at one point says, well, everybody should know who we are. We're the X-Men. And you're a bit like, well, sorry, we're the Avengers. Like, yeah, but you don't have to. Surely you know each other. Like, you've all crossed over in the past. Like, that bit is very, there's a panel for the panel. Yeah, it's a bit bizarre when they do that, because it's like, well, you're all sort of from New York, so you do know each other.
But again, it's kind of, it is bizarre, but it's, I don't want to say it's kind of brilliant, because I'm sure there's more subtle ways. But obviously, you know, was it Stan Lee who used to say, you know, everyone's comic could be someone's first comic? And so there is no comic that has embraced that more than this one. Because if you can know pretty much nothing, I mean, you'd find it pretty difficult. I mean, this is back in the 80s, so you wouldn't necessarily know who the X-Men were, not even Captain America or Iron Man, but you're going to know who the Hulk is. You're going to know who Spider-Man is. So you don't necessarily need to know them. But, I mean, we had a different iteration of Captain Marvel there. You know, and I think to go through that roll call was all just purely for us, wasn't it? Purely for the readers to tell us, right, here are all the different characters. And again, comics at these times, they're read over and over again. So, you know, I'm pretty sure the fact that I've read this over and over again has just helped me fall in love with these different characters.
Yeah, because I say it's definitely the 80s lineup, isn't it? I mean, if you were to do, I mean, it's got the from a hero point of view, it's got your main ones, like your A-list. I mean, if you could give this to a kid now, and it would be an entry point for them. Like they could pick this up. Like, okay, I know who Captain America and Thor and Iron Man and Hawkeye is, and I know the Hulk and Spider-Man are, and the X-Men. I know all those. So, I mean, this is sort of like your main lineup, isn't it? Really. So
Yeah.
it's an easy entry point, really, and it works. You're right. In fact, there's one of the things I did think about. If I was going to give this to a kid, I think it would be a really good first comic, really.
Absolutely, I think it is, and actually, you know what? My son's 9. I might just try it with him.
Mm.
And again, I think for me, because I'd had a little bit earlier, I'd had a lot of the kind of Hulk comics, and you have your wrecking crew in there. I mean,
Yeah.
they've pretty much disappeared from recent continuity, but their costumes are so colourful, and again, Absorbing Man was always one of my favourite villains. I always gravitated towards the heroes, but Absorbing Man, you just think, well, you can absorb any kind of material, and how the hell do you beat someone like that? And so I always thought he was a good match for the Hulk, and I just like the way they all matched up. You've got Doctor Doom there for the Fantastic Four. You've got the Enchantress for Thor, and Claw, the Lizard, Molecule Man, Ultron. Takes a bit of a pounding early on, but
I love that. Yeah,
yeah,
I was gonna say the villains in this are great, and I have to admit, it's I'm a bit of a fan of Doom.
yeah.
Especially when he's at his full, like when he's at full tilt arrogance. Doom is brilliant, and I mean, it must be so much fun to write. The fact he always refers to himself in the third person is so much fun, and it's so funny because like just as there's moments in this where he sort of he tries to sort of like tally on with Galactus, but I like the fact that he is humbled by Galactus to an extent, but he's still like, well, Doom can do anything he desires, and then goes off and does it. You're like, all right, yeah, you actually are quite good fun. You're really good fun because one of the good things this does is this first issue sort of like, not only does it sort of set the stage for you've got what's going to happen for the next 11 issues that follow, it sort of sets up power levels pretty quick as well. Like you say, that they keep going on about how badass Ultron is, and oh my god, he's going to destroy all of us. And then so Ultron attacks Galactus, and Galactus literally just sort of goes like, clicks his fingers and sort of absorbs all of Ultron's energy, and he's done.
Yeah.
And so you're like, actually, no, Galactus is like truly immense. I was like, this is a really good setup for, if I'd have come across this like yourself when I was a kid, I'd have been well up for the rest of the rest of the issues.
Absolutely, and it just makes me a bit sad, really. That I mean, I agree with you. Doctor Doom is such a great character, such a great villain. And they've just failed time and again to bring him to the screen properly. And I mean, the last time was the worst of all. They don't seem to be able to learn from their mistakes. They just make a whole load of new ones. So I am hopeful that now kind of Marvel own that character again, that eventually we are going to build up to something. I don't need to see him in a Fantastic Four #1. Or not the eventual Doctor Doom, so maybe build up to that in a second or a third one or something. But he is a great character.
He's one of those characters that sort of like you say, because he's so much fun in this, and I really enjoy him. And there's a couple of characters that stand out in this, but whenever they've taken him to the sort of other medium, like especially in films, like they just seem really scared of or concerned about playing him that way, because let's be honest, like he is a bit mustache twirling, old school villain, isn't he? He is, and that's why he's so great. But like if you put him on screen that way, I think they're like, oh no, he won't come across right, or he won't be as cool as he needs to be. And I'm like, no, like you just need to do it, and like Doom will do well. I wouldn't worry about it. Yeah.
I think though, I mean, he does. I think there's a bit more depth to him. I mean, he is super smart, and quite often, he'll I guess in a bit like Thanos, where you could actually not necessarily agree with where Thanos was coming from in the MCU, but you could explain why he thinks that way,
Mm.
and he thinks he's on the side of righteousness, kind of thing. I think Doom can be a little bit like that at times. He is absolutely arrogant. Everyone is beneath him. But I think in his mind, some of his actions are virtuous in themselves. So I, let's see. I am hopeful, but I mean, again, you mentioned with Giant Size about some kind of slightly dead end kind of plot points. But
Mm.
the fact that Doom figures out, okay, so we should get everyone together. I'll fly over to the heroes and try and get us all working together against this Beyonder. And but I think he ends up getting shot down, and then he's like, right, screw you guys, screw the lot of you.
Yes, yeah.
It
Doom
just
works
goes
alone.
nowhere.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, well, what was the point in that? I'm genuinely not sure.
Yeah, it does feel like they've got. Oh, this would look good, and to be fair, it does. I mean, there's some bits in this that look cool, and like you say, they don't really go anywhere. There's some other interesting bits. I mean, I read a couple of issues ahead, and I read the next issue, and I like the way this starts to pan out, and because I like the fact that again, like as you sort of said when we were talking about the X-Men, is Magneto appears with the heroes.
Yeah.
Um, and so, when that happens, a lot of the heroes sort of are like, well, no, we've got this bad guy with us. We've got this villain, so we've got to do something about that. And the X-Men actually stand up to him and say, no. Like, basically, almost like he's one of us.
Yeah.
But legitimately, look, we've got no time for this. Let's, let's work together. But I like that he tries to explain himself. He's like, well, I've never murdered anybody unless it's been in. Like, I feel he feels like he's justified. Like I've never killed an innocent. It's always been in defense of Homo superior sort of thing. And again, it's an interesting thing. That's an interesting. That could become something interesting within this arc and stuff. I doubt it does, but it's
Well,
they dabble with it.
it depends how far ahead. I think did you get up? I think him and Wasp have a bit of a thing. I mean, I haven't gone back and read the whole run for a while, but pretty
Mm.
sure him and Wasp have a bit of a thing. But definitely, this was the first time that I'd ever considered a villain to be a bit grey. And again, I have to say, my two top villains are probably Magneto and Joker.
Mm.
And I have to. The Joker's just awesome, but I think the reason it's probably Magneto does probably come back to this first issue, where
Mm.
it was the first time when I'd understood, villains can have they can think they're the hero of their own story. And, if you look at, I guess, more modern motivations and stuff, I say more modern, when you've had characters like the Punisher and whatever around since the 80s, but not everyone is whiter than white. And I think the fact that you've had Scott Summers walk in the Magneto line, and quite often, in the X-Men comics, Magneto will flip-flop. He'll be with the Brotherhood, and the
Mm.
X-Men will be fighting him. The next minute, he's with the X-Men, and so he does flip-flop. And I think I just like that greyness to his character. And again, if you think about his kind of World War II origins, the way they kind of rewrote all of that, to build that up as part of his backstory, you start to understand it. It all makes sense with this, this minority being persecuted, and of course, you would think a lot of people would want to fight back on that.
Yeah. And I think hit nail on the head. I think that's it. Magneto is one of those characters that has got so much depth and can be played in so many ways that he's just a really interesting character, not just a villain, but just as a character. And I think that's
Mhm.
and I didn't realize until recently. Someone I sort of always assumed that his Jewish heritage and the whole Holocaust thing was a part and parcel of his character. But no, apparently it was Chris Claremont that sort of introduced that early on in his run. So that's not something that's been around for all that long, really. And but I think it's one of the best additions to a character. It really adds something, another level really to that, which I think so.
Yeah, I
Great
mean,
character.
like I say, I mean, you got to love Stan Lee, and in terms of one person who's influenced the whole comics industry, there can't be many that that can stand next to him. But in terms of the X-Men, I mean, if you ever go back and read those stories, they're not great.
Mm.
Stan was great at the razzmatazz, he was great at the showmanship and all of that. But for me, uh, I would advise anyone to go back to those Chris Claremont issues and just see the interactions between all the teams. And I tell you what, there are very few people that can stand up to Chris Claremont and say that they write good, strong female characters like he can. I mean, the way
No,
he's developed Storm, Rogue, the way he kind of took Carol Danvers, into that
mm.
X-Men world for a while, he really developed females on a par with the male characters.
No, I'd agree with that, definitely. I mean, I've read quite a bit of the Chris Claremont run, and it is fun. It's just stand up. It is really good. Like you said, it gets wordy, but it feels like one of those. It feels like one of those runs that sort of like everything starts to pay off, and you benefit from sticking with it. It feels like you definitely get more from it the more you read. Um,
Hundred
so yeah,
percent.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and
There's
I think is it the McDonald's adverts that say, like getting your money's worth? Well, if you
yes,
want to
yeah.
if you want to buy a Chris Claremont X-Men issue, you get your money's worth out of it because it's going to take you ages to get through it.
I remember, like you say, when you're sort of you're coming up through the comics thing, and you're first starting out, and you start, especially with the internet age, you start to learn about those key issues or those key runs or those sort of the story arcs that you've got to read, and they stand out. And everyone sort of talks about the Dark Phoenix saga, and you're like, oh, I've got to read that. It's one of the key X-Men ones. Oof, that's a read. That's that's a real read. That is. It's brilliant. It's really good. But yeah, that's a read and a half.
It is that keeps you going for a long time, and again, these days you just download them all from Comixology, or
Mm.
because I doubt you'll need to dig deep into your pockets if you want to collect all of those. So, most people I think will download those, and it will take you a while to go through. But when it was coming out month to month, can you imagine that?
Oh,
Reading along and
yeah,
thinking, where the hell is this going? Because
yeah.
the way it starts out with kind of breaking Jean down and her psyche with Mastermind and everything, and the way that whole story evolves, and of course, what actually love about the Dark Phoenix saga is that it wasn't 100% Chris Claremont. It was the
Mm,
fact that you had that editorial interference, if you like, but it created something that was better. And
mm.
again, comics is such a collaborative medium anyway, isn't it? I just like that as a great example where if the writer was left to his own devices, I'm afraid, Gene and Scott would have ridden off happily into the sunset. And it was the editor
Mm.
who turned around and said, look, you can't just commit mass genocide and then still
And
be a
get away
hero.
with it. Yeah. And
So,
that's it. And those things, and that's why it stands up as, and that's why it's been made into two films. They keep trying to, again, one of those things they never seem to get right. But it's a fantastic story. It's a shame it's never really been done properly, but it's worth going. I would definitely recommend going back and because the X Men are littered with great books and terrible books. They really do sort of. I think there's some writers that just miss the beat, and there's others that just nail it, and they can just. I mean, Dark Phoenix Saga, but there's to completely go off. But you also get like, was it God Loves, Man Kills,
oh, yeah, yeah,
which was one of those that again, sort of, someone's like, oh yeah, you should read this, and that just blows you away. Like that's just
yeah.
out and out, like not just a good comic, that's just a good story. So, um, yeah, these
Yeah.
can be some really really good stuff.
And again, that really just stands up, doesn't it? And I think the shame, I mean, because of these early runs, the X-Men, obviously they appear in both of my choices. They less so in the Secret Wars. Unfortunately, what's happened sort of post 90s, I mean, the X-Men just exploded, didn't they? And
Mm,
and instead of having, initially you had the main X-Men run, and then 82, I think you had the New Mutants coming out, but that was still all kind of architected by Chris Claremont. So he kept these things very uh, tight, and he'd have these kind of dangling plot threads that he'd pick up a couple of years later. So if you were a fan reading through at the time, which I wasn't, but I kind of go back and read them retrospectively. But if you were, I just think that would have been amazing to think, hang about, that traces back to something that happened ages ago, So
Mm.
I think that would be great. I think, unfortunately, what's happened because of their success, you've now got 20 X-Men books or something.
Yeah.
And, Wolverine, and I know he's died recently and he's coming back. But you've got Cyclops in 8 different books a month. So all of the writers don't really have control to be able to, do anything with him. They have to keep them all so bland, and they kind of make them all caricatures of themselves. Like Beast in particular has been treated horribly.
Mm.
And so there's no depth to the characters because they're used in all these different books. So it's only when you have these kind of spin-off books, that still tackle this mutant world, that you really get some good content. I think like one of the chaps I spoke to on Comics in Motion last year, David Hine, did District X. And so
Mm.
that was all set in Mutant Town, and there wasn't really, there were none of the main characters really in there. And that is a great, great book. But basically, because he could do what he wanted.
The amount of times you hear that, though, is it, when you sort of, your A-listers or your top flight characters get protected, unless they're going to sort of orchestrate some, like say, massive change or massive death.
Yeah.
They try and keep that even keel. So stories are usually fine, but like you say, you want something that feels a bit risky and a bit like things are like probably going to happen and people are under threat. And you say you do get that in. Sometimes that's why I enjoy like lesser characters, because you think like, yeah, I've no idea where this is going to go, because the company doesn't really care. So it's one of the reasons I love Moon Knight so much, because the company doesn't really care about him. So when they do come, it's like, I wonder what's going to happen now, because it could be anything. But you're right about those big stories, like you say. And Wolverine at one point, I remember like early 2000s, sort of, he was in everything, like every X-Men book. He was in the Avengers. He had his
Yeah.
solo title. Like, he was everywhere, to the extent where you're just like, I'm bored of him now. I'm really sick of seeing him.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, again, one of the things that's happened again with the success of it, and the characters just becoming caricatures of themselves. Wolverine is just, he's almost at Superman level power set, whereas in the Claremont run, it still took him time to heal. He couldn't have his
Mm.
arm blown off and then grow it back in 3 seconds. He'd be injured, and then it would take him time to recover. And then at some point, again, I blame most things on the 90s, to be honest, when it comes to comics. So I think it's sometime around there, he just became way too powerful.
Yeah, I always remember as when they did Civil War, and there were
Hmm.
people that had, characters had their sort of like their own little Civil War run that was sort of like,
Yep, yep.
how they tied into it. And the Wolverine one is actually quite a lot of fun. It's sort of like he ends up wanting to take revenge. He wants to take revenge on the the person who accidentally killed all the kids and stuff. That instigates the sort of the Civil War. So it's him sort of tracking him down and stuff. And it's
Hmm.
really good. It's a good story. However, there is a part in that story where he gets blown up, and obviously it doesn't destroy his skeleton because it's made of adamantium or coated, but it blows off like all his flesh and all his organs. So you just see this sort of like adamantium skeleton lying on the floor. But the monologue is that like, but molecules of his essence or his remained on the skeleton, and it's like 72 hours later, and it's sort of like 73 days to grow an entire body back.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is. I was like you said, I'm like, it's a good book, but I'm sort of
It,
struggling with this.
it's pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I think and Deadpool's pretty much of an equal power set as well. So yeah, I mean that's not great. I will say one of the honourable mentions, one that didn't make the top 3, was Old Man Logan.
Mm.
So by Mark Millar, and because that's an alternate future storyline, you don't really know what's going on there, and the twist in that story, I
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that just blew my mind, and properly to, if you watch like Sixth Sense or something like that, or recently went back to watch From Dusk Till Dawn, and I think back to how it blew my mind initially, and it occupies your mind space for the next few weeks. Old Man Logan was like that. I
Yeah,
just couldn't believe it, and I thought, why has no one done this before?
yeah. It's one of those it's one of those ideas. It's so simple. As like you say, that twist that when the villains sort of attack. I'm not going to spoil that because
Yeah,
unless it's no, but the simple idea of of taking somebody else's villain and using them in that way
yeah,
it's brilliant, and it's tragic, and I love his response to that as well. Um, it's it is. It's a very, very good. That's a very good book. That is. That's an excellent
yeah,
book.
yeah. But I mean, getting back to Secret Wars again. I think I
Mm,
just like the fact that it's such a simple story. You've got this kind of contrived beyonder who just wants to get a bunch of goodies and a bunch of baddies on two different parts of the world, and the winners will prevail. But again, you go back, and lots of interesting things happened in this run. I mean, this is where Spider-Man first got his black costume, so
mm,
kind of obviously it wasn't Venom at the time, but that kind of is Venom's first appearance. But also, again, to bring it back to the X-Men, I'm afraid. So uh, Colossus and Kitty Pryde were actually dating at the time. Now, I'm sure Kitty was supposed to be about 15 or something, whereas Colossus was about 22 or something.
yeah, it's all a bit iffy at this point. Yeah,
It is all a little bit Jimmy Savile. So,
yeah,
again, bit of editorial input, a bit of a nudge, and, Colossus kind of ends up having a bit of a thing with an alien from another world there, and it's like, oh yeah, sorry, Kitty, but we've split up.
yeah. Also, the final thing in that, the way they've handled Kitty Pryde over the years has always been a bit interesting because she's meant to have been that sort of young character that sort of that sort of almost a point of view character in many ways.
Yeah,
But they've always sort of they can't in comics they can't help but, for want of a better phrase, sex them up a little bit,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you're always a bit like, no, stop it. You don't have to do that. We get what you're trying to do.
I think
Um,
unfortunately what's happened to Kitty, because you had Jubilee appearing in the X-Men animated series, and I don't know if you listen to, like, when you have these big creators from Marvel and stuff on the official Marvel podcast and whatever,
mm,
it's amazing how many of them say the first thing that got them into comics was that X-Men animated series. But because I mean, Jubilee hadn't been around for that long, I don't know why she got such a headline part, especially in that first couple of episodes.
mm.
But basically, she was the role that Kitty Pryde played. She was that point of view character. Wolverine kind of took her under his wing, kind of thing, and then suddenly Jubilee's there occupying that space. So that leaves or has left Kitty Pryde a little bit out in the cold. So, I mean, she is one of my favorite characters, but again, she's not really been handled that well, I don't think, over the years.
No, she's one of those characters that it's clear they never really knew what to do with her. But I mean, I'm a big fan of, from an X-Men point of view, I'm a big fan of Excalibur.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, I more came across that because I love Captain Britain. Going back to sort of, I mean, going back to like the '70s run, when, like you say, when it was Marvel UK, UK,
Yeah.
through to sort of the Alan Moore run and Alan Davis. But for some reason, I just really, it's so. I mean, Excalibur's not good. I'll be honest with you. It's not. It's not. I couldn't laud it as a great series, but it's fun. It's really good fun. And Kitty Pryde is actually like, she takes a lead in that, and she becomes quite
Hmm.
a sort of a strong character. And so I just love her from that. That was sort of my exposure to her. Um, so
I think, and just digressing a bit, I mean, do you think we'll ever see a Captain Britain in the MCU?
no, no, it's too niche. I mean, it's that thing, isn't it? Of sort of like, you've got Captain America, and there'll always be the excuse of like, well, they'll get confused or whatever. But I would love to see it as a Disney Plus series,
Yeah.
and I would love to see it done in the Alan Moore way, where he's actually just a bit of a lunkhead. Like, he's a bit of a tit, really. But he's doing good, and he wants to do good. But he's not. He's a bit of a pillock. I prefer him in that mode.
Yeah. I mean, I think wasn't there there was a hint of him, wasn't there, in one of the I think it was Endgame. You know where Cap is sort of staring through the blinds at Peggy.
Yes, they've hinted at different things because you do see sort of Brian Braddock, the name Braddock on
Yep.
things. But also, of course, if you have UK characters in the first Captain America, you have
Union Jack.
Union Jack. So you got what's it, Farnsworth there, who
Yeah,
obviously is
yeah.
the first Union Jack. So there's always that hint, and it's always like, oh, you're always going to hint this, and you're never going to give it to us. So
I would absolutely love to see some kind, again, honourable mention, some the comics that I was thinking about kind of including, but the Invaders comics where you had Cap, you had Union Jack, you had the Human Torch, you had Namor the Submariner. Again, brilliant comics, those.
There's some. I used to look. They're really. I've gone back and I've got quite a few of those. Those are really good. And they're, like I say, just simple, really good fun adventures. And that's where Marvel, for me, that's where Marvel thrived. Is that sort of and that's why I think why it works in the MCU. That's slightly more light-hearted, but just really, really good adventure stories that you can sort of get your teeth into. So
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think we're ready to swing the other way now. So we've talked about light-hearted adventures and sort of that sort of thing. And so let's talk about your third and final choice for Desert Island Comics. What have you chosen?
Well, as you say, this is the other end of the pendulum, isn't it? Now, again, being at the age that we are, sort of growing up in the 80s, I think you had reruns of the Batman 66 series and the movie all the time. And so it's this very campy but iconic, image of Batman and also Robin and then the likes of Joker, the Riddler. Now, my third pick comes from 1988. It is written by Alan Moore, and it's Batman: The Killing Joke.
Yeah, now this is a seminal book for a number of reasons. Some good, some not so good. But yeah, so tell us why you chose this book.
Well, I think this was again when I was a bit older. I didn't really sort of have that much kind of input, not input, but I didn't have that. There was no internet, in the kind of early 90s to kind of look at. There were no comic book shops, so it's not even as if you could go into a comic. Well, there probably were, but not in St. Helens where I was. And so, I ended up coming across this one, and it just absolutely blew my mind that Batman and Joker could be portrayed in this way. Because again, if you go back, I mean, I've gone back since, but you go back to those early kind of Batman issues, and the Joker's not that far different. He is a psychotic, crazy mofo. But when you had the whole comics code and everything, they just watered him down. And so, again, I think you end up the Batman 66 wasn't that far removed from what was happening in the comics. And so when you get that kind of opening when he shoots Barbara Gordon through the spine, and you just think, wow, what the hell is this? It absolutely blew my mind. And the fact that you have this you have an origin story for the Joker in there as well. I felt like that was quite interesting. But then later in the book, he kind of says, well, I like to think of it, he's, one way, 1 minute, then I remember it a different way. I like to think of these things as being multiple choice. So he's given us this origin, but then he's kind of given us the get out as well and saying, well, it might be this way and it could be another. So I just think for the tone of it, it felt like, for early in my, early or teenage life, that I was reading a grown up superhero story. So at that time when I kind of felt like I was growing out of comics, it was like, wow, this is a different world for me.
Yeah. and this comes out of that sort of the 80s push, wasn't it? That sort of comics could be more grown up, and obviously you've had previous to this, you had sort of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, and sort of the start of Vertigo with sort of Alan Moore and doing a Saga of the Swamp Thing and all those kinds of things. It's obviously it came together, and you get the Killing Joke, and as you say, it's a different book. I mean, it's in that sense of, like you say, Batman in it is portrayed in a certain way. I mean, they haven't gone the full, he's not gone the full Frank Miller and got him as a sort of a violent aggressor. But you are led to question Batman in this. Like, there's moments in this when you're like, oh yeah, this the whole thing is crazy. Like, not just the Joker. Like, this book says to you, like, no, both of these people are nuts.
Yeah.
and there's no two ways about that. And I love that. And again, I love the fact that I love this notion of one bad day.
Yeah.
And I love his monologue when he's like, you must have, like we said, when he's monologuing to Batman, like, you had one bad day. What was it? What broke you? Was it a boyfriend? Was it a girlfriend? Was it this? Was it that? What happened? What made you don your cape, sort of thing? And I love the fact that, like, he is paralleling himself and saying, like, we both had this situation. We just went different ways about dealing with it.
Yeah.
You chose to don a mask, and I went crazy, sort of thing. And I love it. I just think it's such a fascinating take on the Joker in particular. This idea of sort of like, when I saw Joker last year, sort of I enjoyed it. It's a good film. It's got it's I won't get into the whole Oscars thing, whether it deserved an Oscar, but the performances in it were fantastic. But the one issue I did have with that film was that Arthur Fleck felt sort of dark, and he starts, like, obviously he's got his own mental health issues and those other things, but he feels sort of like, for want of a better phrase, dark and broken at the beginning, and just gets more dark and broken. And I get the theme that they were telling, but like you say, the thing I love about this is that it's more about just a schlub. Like, this is just a guy who's really down on his luck, and it's just like a series of events that just get worse and worse, that really push him over the edge, and that really break him. It is like that backstory that he gives, if it's real, is like the world was just against him on that day. It's terrible. And so I don't know. There's just something about that I just really enjoy. That I think it's twisted, but it's so good.
It absolutely is, and I think I mean just picking up on your point on the Joker movie, I really enjoyed it. I thought Joaquin Phoenix's performance, for me personally, as soon as I saw it, I did think that was Oscar worthy. Everything else just kind of orbited around him. Was it a great storyline or whatever? I'm not sure, but his performance I thought was great. I guess the only problem I have with overlaying that performance on the Joker that I know is, do I really think he could take down Batman? And stand toe to, or not necessarily physically toe to toe with him, but really go up against him. And I think there's been a lot of talk. So who's the best Joker now? Is it Joaquin Phoenix? Is it Heath Ledger? For me, it's still Heath Ledger.
Yeah. It's that, because the Heath Ledger Joker feels more or less, because although he sort of talks about chaos and all sort of thing, like, it's calculated, and it's calculated chaos, and that's what this feels like. That's sort of like what the Killing Joke is to me. I mean, this idea of taking Gotham's top cop in Commissioner Gordon and trying to prove his point that, like, no, if I really, really make things horrible for you, I can bring you to my level. I can make you understand, and you will be just the same as me. So, it's just fantastic. I mean, the one issue I would have is, has it aged well? There's what we refer to as the fridging effect. The use of Barbara Gordon in this. It's questionable.
So what do you mean, the fridging effect?
So there's the notion, obviously, you know what fridging is. I'll explain. So there was is it Carl Rayner? There was this the Green
Hmm.
Lantern.
Yeah,
One of his
yeah.
girlfriend was chopped and shoved in the fridge, and it just drives it. So it always has to be the woman, an issue happening to a woman that drives revenge for in a male world.
Okay.
So you get the attack on Barbara Gordon, and the shooting is one thing, fine, because she literally opens the door, and I've never had a problem with that because that could have been anybody. I don't think the Joker really cares. But it's the later on when Gordon's sort of at the amusement park and he's going around the amusement park and he's shown all the pictures of it's
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's titillating, but you are showing glimpses of a clearly naked Barbara Gordon in some sort of distress.
Yeah.
And then when she's in the hospital, she says to Batman, like, she's clearly like in shock, and she says like, no, it's not okay. He's taking it to the limit this time. You didn't see him, and you're like, it sort of alluded to the fact that like something terrible happened to her. And again, you can read into it what you want. Like, it could have just been photos and they just humiliated her. But again, it's the fact they chose to do it to Barbara Gordon for her father. It's sort of like, it's that thing of like, well, I think even Alan Moore's admitted that, it's probably not in the best taste these days.
Right. It's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. I mean, Alan Moore's admitted that.
Yeah, yeah. Not
After
recently.
shooting down Frank Miller constantly over his misogynistic writing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, look, as a guy with two daughters myself, I can't think of many things worse to happen than that. And it is left suitably vague, isn't it? It's not coming out and saying this is what happened. It's all just suggestions. So it's making your brain work, and you're left to fill in the blanks, and you can let them blanks be wherever your mind takes you. So I think I'm kind of okay with it. The other reason that I'm kind of okay with it is, if you read a comic and basically at the end of it, the status quo is still the same. Again, Stan Lee said, the fans have to feel that illusion of change, so nothing actually changes, but it just feels like change. Whereas this, the shooting and paralyzing Barbara Gordon, who was Batgirl, had real consequences, and you're sort of thinking at the end of the story, how bad it is. But then, of course, she goes on to become the Oracle. So, it's not all terrible, but it did have real consequences to it.
But that was a retrospective decision, because this was supposed to be a non-continuity sort of Elseworld kind of book.
Yeah.
And when it happened, and then they were sort of like, oh, actually, this is a really good like place to be at. And so then, they introduced as Oracle, which is great because you do get the whole sort of, her as Oracle is actually really cool. But yeah, it is interesting how, like, Alan Moore never really intended this to be in continuity, which is why, again, like we said about the other things, like it felt like it could be dangerous because it wasn't supposed to have an impact on the wider world. It just did. They took it because it was so good. Two questions. There are two key sort of things in the book that they all sort of come to is, as we sort of said, is sort of like Joker's history. So I know it's a multiple choice, but this history, this sort of story of him being being a schlub that sort of tricked into becoming the Red Hood.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it really?
I mean, it's. I'm not sure if I believe it or not. Like you said, I mean, the world was definitely against him, wasn't it? It just seemed like he was down on his luck. I think, like a lot of these Batman stories, they feel like they're best placed in that time in the 30s, in and around that Great Depression time. You sort of think, well, if that was today, would that really kind of happen? No, but if I think I'm in the 30s, in and around that Great Depression time, then it could happen. But no, I thought it was believable. I think the image, when you turn the page and when he's finally turning into the Joker and he's sort of gripping he's got his fingers through his hair and you've got all the ha-ha-has around it and everything. I just find absolutely chilling. But I mean, what do you think about it?
It's an interesting one because I like it as a story, and it's how I sort of it's one of my favourite origins of the Joker because it's that thing I've always said. Arthur Fleck becoming the Joker sort of feels almost like inevitable. But the idea of have you ever seen It's a Wonderful Life?
You know what? I haven't. It's one of my shames. I think there's a few. I managed to right a wrong. I hadn't seen The Godfather up until earlier this year, so I've righted that wrong. But I do have to watch It's a Wonderful Life.
Well, I'm not going to spoil it because I think you should do that on VHS Strikes Back at some point. But there's a character in that played by James Stewart called George Bailey, and he's sort of like he's like this quintessentially sort of good guy, and he sort of leads his life, and that's how I sort of feel like that's the character that this becomes the Joker, and so it makes the Joker just more tragic for me. Like it doesn't make him any less dangerous or any less lethal or crazy, but it makes him more tragic. This idea that the world just gave him an absolute beating, and from his point of view now, just all he wants to do is just tear it down. And he finds it hilarious now that this is the case. So, and like that final moment, as you say, the thing where he sort of comes out the water, having been doused in the chemicals, and you get that moment of sort of like, and again, the one thing we haven't mentioned that we really got to is the Brian Bolland art.
Oh, so good.
Because it shows it as a sort of he removes the hood which he's been trapped in, and then you sort of see it in a puddle, because obviously puddles play a really big part in this, and reflections, which is because the whole thing's about reflecting and dark reflections of each other. And then there's sort of the slow turnaround to then just the cackling, as you said, that probably one of the most iconic images of the Joker. It's just so good, and it's so satisfying in a sort of tragic way. But yeah, again, like you, I don't take it as the definitive end or the definitive story. But yeah, to me, it's one of my favourites. It's easily one of my favourite sort of notions of the Joker.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned about the artwork. Boland's artwork is just phenomenal. And again, when I think of the Joker, I think of this kind of this way he's drawn. But it's interesting that the original colouring was done by a chap called John Higgins, who did Watchmen as well. And I've got to admit, I prefer it was redone. So Brian Boland himself redid it for a deluxe edition, and it just fits a lot more. It fits a lot better, I think, for me.
Yeah, there's a surrealist feel to the sort of the original colouring that's sort of quite blocky and quite sort of it feels quite 80s in that sort of sense.
Yeah,
it's quite, but it's not great, and I do love the recoloured version. It sort of it grounds it again, because it's a very grounded story, and to have it in that sort of like the real sort of I won't say gritty, but those real tones is really makes it sort of hit home.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Just sometimes the worlds align and it all comes together. I mean, I can't fault Watchmen the way John Higgins has coloured that. It's just like you say, it's just a little bit off for the original Killing Joke, and I just love the deluxe edition there.
I agree. No, that's definitely my preferred version. Last question about this then, because it's that sort of like controversy that sort of, not even controversy, it's probably a strong word, but the notion that came out a few years ago was in the final pages. There's a moment shared between Batman and the Joker, and they share a laugh, and it's that thing of sort of like just of all the madness that's going on, just that moment of silliness. But I think it was maybe even Grant Morrison that kicked off this idea on Batman. Does as they're laughing and everything, does Batman kill the Joker on that final page?
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
100%.
And that's how you've always taken it.
Not always, but as soon as I read that theory, I went back, went straight to my bookshelf, looked at it, and I'm like, how have I not seen that before? I mean, again, I say 100%. There's few things in life that are absolutes, but I strongly believe that that's the intent. Otherwise, I don't think you can really explain it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. What do you mean explain it? Because the panel work, you mean, or
the panel work, just the way they're laughing uncontrollably, because Joker tells him, I can't quite remember what the joke is, but both Joker and Batman start laughing, and all the way through the story, as you said, you're exploring this idea that Batman and Joker are just two sides of the same coin. It's
Mm.
not this. Again, that was one of the other things that struck me about it. Because I'd grown up on Batman '66, where Batman is clearly the goodie and Joker is
Mm.
clearly the baddie. And then you start to explore this type of story, and you're like, hang about, it's a bit more murky than that. So yeah, they're kind of laughing uncontrollably. You can see all the ha ha ha's all over the panels and everything, and then it just stops absolutely dead. And so I just, for me, yeah, he's killed him. But like you say, because it was intended to be this Elseworld story.
Mm. Yeah, and that's it. So Alan Moore's never commented on that, and Brian Bolland actually came out and said that it was never their sort of definitive intent, but it was left ambiguous for that reason.
Hmm.
Um, and I like the fact that, I mean, the final part of the book, there's the last 3 pages are just some of the best comics. I just think the best comics. I mean, there's a moment like, Batman's spent a while literally beating the crap out of the Joker, and then he says to him, like, all of this is like, it doesn't have to be like Batman saying to Joker, it doesn't have to be this way. Like,
Yeah.
I could help you. There are things we could do. And the Joker's face is just like, no, sorry, it's too late. It's all gone. It's gone too far. Like, this is a, you know, it's this is it now. This is the roller coaster that we're on, sort of thing. And then he tells the joke, doesn't he? He says about it's the 2 escapees from the asylum, and
Oh, it's
he
the
says, like,
flashlight. Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
flash.
Yep.
He says, he said, I don't trust you because you'll turn it off halfway through. When I'm halfway across, and it's a genuinely sort of quite a funny joke, but that moment to me is, I don't think he kills him. I did for a while, and then to me I was like, oh, I'm not sure, and I was like, I can't believe, I'm not going to go into this whole thing of like Batman doesn't kill, because that's regardless, and so especially if it's Elseworlds. But I just think for that moment, it's just these two, for me, these two broken people, um, acknowledging the sort of like the ludicrous situation that they are in. Like, I think the reason Batman is laughing is, I think he's able to step aside and say, do you know what we have here? We have a man dressed in a Batman costume, and we have a guy dressed as a clown fighting each other in an amusement park, and it is ludicrous. Like, this makes no sense. And I just feel that, like, it's that moment of laughter that, to me, just feels like that. And I think that the panel breakdown, that the last panel of the book is the same as the first panel of the book. Like, they are literally identical. And so to me, the book represents a cycle. Like, this is the book, to me, is always going to be, they will, the acknowledgement of they are on this cycle again and again and again. Like, this will keep happening, to the extent of, like, that last panel is the same as the next panel. That last panel is the same as the first panel, and this ongoing thing will go on and on and on. So there is no one bad day. They're just going to keep going. And so, I felt it represented more, to me, was this idea of a cycle rather than a definitive end. But yeah, no, that's what I like about this book as well, is because people have these different ideas about it.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That I hadn't noticed that it's the first panel as well. But I've just brought it up. I'm just looking at it now, and again, you've got the police sirens coming from the
Mm.
distance, so you can see that kind of with the sirens, and then you've got the ha ha ha's, and it's just the way it goes to the rain on the floor, and you see the kind of red
Yeah,
on the floor. I'm not sure if it's not blood, what that's supposed to be. And you're absolutely right. I think it's, Batman doesn't kill, or he's not supposed to kill. But again, I don't think, I think because Alan Moore thinks he's off piste, he can kind of do whatever he wants.
yeah,
And you sort of think, okay, if it wasn't this silly universe where you've got Batman in it, and the
yeah.
Joker, if this was real life, what would he do? You know, is he
Well,
going to
what should
make
he
that?
do?
Yeah, is he in that choice? If he
Mm.
if he can break out of that cycle, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not advocating go off and do this sort of thing. But if he can break that cycle, a lot of people would do it. And so again,
Mm.
I think for me, that's that explains those last few panels. But I completely agree with you. I love the fact that it's ambiguous. But I just thought, I'd like to get off on the fence on these things. I'm
Yeah.
analytical most of my day job, so it's nice to be a bit bolshy and say
No,
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 it's
it's good. And
absolutely this way.
but to me, that's why this book is so good. Because there are times I'll read it and I say, I'll come out and go, no, he does kill him. And there's others where I'm like, no, 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 it's this and this. And again, it's one of those books you can read, and it's it's just it's fun's the wrong word, but it's a satisfying Batman and Joker story. And then others, you can sit and analyze the panels and see what's sort of meant by where the panel structure is and what Brian Bolland's put in the artwork and what's in the dialogue, and you can really like analyze it and stuff. So it's to me it's one of the most satisfying. I return to it quite a lot. It's one of the most satisfying comics, I think, for me. So great choice.
Absolutely, I go back to it a lot as well, and actually, I mean, Alan Moore doesn't do the whole Comic Con circuit anymore, really, does he? But I did manage to catch him. He was at the Nice Comic Con, so Northampton Comic Con when it was actually in Northampton and not Bedford, and I think it was the first one, and to get in to see him do a talk.
Was that when was it the cricket club and you had to give the graphic novel?
That's right. Yeah. Were you there?
I was there. I did,
Wow.
but I couldn't stay for the Alan Moore talk. I had to get back for something. I was so gutted. Yeah.
Oh no! I'm sure there's probably someone must have snapped it on their phone or something. There's probably videos up on YouTube or whatever. But it was really interesting for me because he brought up Killing Joke, as I'm sure if you manage to catch him in the streets. I mean, actually you're not too far from him. I'm sort of the other side of Northampton, aren't I? But he's not too far from me. But he was saying he regrets kind of writing that book because Batman as a character, it should be a fun character, and so to do such a dark take, but then not only that, for that dark take to really drive the direction of Batman. And probably, it's had a massive influence on the wider comics, hasn't it? It's quite a lot of comics now that take that much darker route than before. So he actually said he regretted it, but I think most of us in the audience were like, "Nah, still great, not having it."
Saying that though, it's interesting that you say, because there is this sort of idea with certain writers of like, oh yeah, I want to write the Killing Joke for the Green Lantern. I want to write the Killing Joke for the Flash or whatever.
Mhm.
This idea of having that definitive story for that character, and it's inspired a lot of people to try and go down that dark path, and try and do that sort of like that story for that character. And some just don't deserve it. Like I don't think Superman ever needs to have like that dark and gritty telling of of a sort of that sort of story. It's just not that character.
Absolutely not. And I think I know Zack Snyder has a lot of fans, and I think I think his
Yeah.
movies are interesting, but they just don't get Superman. I mean, someone like Batman, you want that grittiness, you want to explore that side of that character. For Superman, I'm sorry, but I'm into the Christopher Reeve Superman.
Yeah.
He'll always be Superman for me. He's still got to be that Boy Scout, and trying to make him all mean and moody and have washed out colors and stuff. It just doesn't work for me at all, I'm afraid.
No, I mean it's one of those, isn't it? Sort of like again, to go to another one of my favorite writers, it's the definitive, almost definitive Superman story for me is All Star Superman, by Grant
Yep.
Morrison.
Yeah,
It's such a, and Frank Whiteley's art is outstanding. So, yeah, I think
that duo. I actually recently read We Three. Have you watched that?
that book is wonderful and heartbreaking. It's such a good book. That is 3 issues, just
Yeah.
such a slim book, but it's so good and told. Like I think you sort of mentioned in the podcast, like almost without dialogue.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, did
Yeah,
I can't remember if I'd spoken about it at all, but it's one of those I'd never even heard of it. But obviously it's this quite famous duo. It's Morrison and Quietly, and you know, you're looking through, and so much of the storytelling is done through the artwork. Clearly, Morrison would have architected the story, but in terms of dialogue, it's really light. But like you say, just such a touching story, and 3 issues, you can blast through it, fairly quickly. But yeah, an amazing creative team.
Yeah. Those. I mean, like I say, I really like those two when Morrison did his X-Men run, and they've done some of the good bits. But
Yeah, not a massive fan of his new X-Men, to be honest, but
Oh, really?
yeah, no, it's again, I know. I think when he did the X-Men, I think he's quite polarizing. I think for some people he was like a breath of fresh air, but I don't know. I think for me, I'll always be a bit of a stick in the mud and be a bit of a Claremont fanboy, I think.
That's it. Go for the classics, and they're the classics for a reason.
Yeah.
Dave, it's been fantastic talking to you, and really appreciate you sort of coming on and do your top 3, your Desert Island comics. I've really enjoyed reading them, going back and reading some of these, and it's been great talking about them. So thank you very much.
No, it's brilliant. And thanks so much for having me on. And it has been a blast. And, although these are the ones that I'll take to the desert island, haven't read certainly a couple of them in a few years. So to go back to them, to refresh myself and bathe myself in a bit of nostalgia and indulge in some great conversation with you, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as we go out there, so where can people find you and your podcasts?
So if you want to listen to a bit of comics, we do a podcast, myself and my co-host Chris. We do Comics in Motion, so you could find wherever you get your podcasts from. If you want to head across to Twitter, we're on Comics in Motion P. You can also get us, if you want to indulge in a bit of retro, classic home video movies from that VHS era, you can get us on The VHS Strikes Back, again, wherever you get your podcasts from. And on Twitter, it's VHS Strikes Back. And I think for the comics we've got coming up, doing a Harley Quinn Birds of Prey, as it's recently been renamed. And I think for the VHS we've got coming up another Sly Stallone classic, Over the Top.
Oh my God.
which Chris assures me he loves. And honestly, I'll share with you, spoilers, it's shit.
Yeah. I can't wait to see how Chris can defend that one. I was impressed with his No Retreat, No Surrender, but if you can defend Over the Top, that's impressive.
Oh, I don't hold out much hope. He will try, but I've watched the first 20 minutes, and it's a movie about arm wrestling for a start. Yeah. But I've gone back and watched the first 20 minutes, and it's not great.
Oh, you wait till you get to the finale. It's amazing. And on that note, thank you very much, Dave, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you. Bye now.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Another great 20th Century Geek episode. Thank you for listening. If you would like to get in contact to suggest topics for future shows, or just chat about everything nerdy, you can email me at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. That's 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. Or find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Just search for 20th Century Geek. If you would like to support the show, please go on your podcast catcher and leave a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. It raises the show in the ranks and lets more people know about the podcast. If you want to show more support for the podcast, we do have an Amazon wish list. Just go on Amazon and search for 20th Century Geek, and you will find a list of books that will help with research for future podcasts. And don't forget, we love second-hand books in 20th Century Towers. Once again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.